Welcome to Exploring Monterey Bay, airing bi-weekly on KSQD 90.7, 89.7, and 89.5 FM. I'm your host, Mathilde Rand. My guests are Frank Barron and Rick Longinotti, and we will talk about the Santa Cruz Downtown Plan Expansion. Frank Barron is a retired urban planner and a proponent for direct input by the community on building higher than the already generous height limits. Rick Longinotti is an environmental activist concerned with the water requirements if the downtown plan expansion proposed by the Santa Cruz leadership will take effect. Welcome, Rick and Frank.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So, Frank, could you tell us a little bit about how you got involved in the downtown plan expansion?
It's been going on for a couple of years now. We got a group together to put a ballot measure, Measure M, on the ballot to require a vote of the people before the city could raise height limits. And that failed back in March, but the project itself that kind of was the genesis of that ballot measure is ongoing, and it's a big deal right now.
Which project was that?
This is the Downtown Plan Expansion, it's called. The Downtown Plan already exists, and they want to expand the area that it covers to the south of Laurel area. And that's so about 29 acres. That includes where the Warriors Stadium is. It includes like Wheelworks, Ace Hardware, all the way down to where Aloha Motors is, if you know where that is, going all the way along the base of Beach Hill down to where those motels are and the traffic circle by Depot Park. Mm-hmm. And then even more than that.
And so did I understand that after Measure M was defeated, kind of the next day, there was already this big plan for the downtown, like 16 stories?
Yes, the Clock Tower Center was proposed the day after the election, and it was sort of like, wow, okay, this is something that the new state law, there was already a density bonus law on the books, and a new one came out, AB 1287, and that allows it to be even more. It's a 100% density bonus. So this project, people remember it as a huge 16-story structure, 192 feet right across from where the clock tower is, and that's a 192-foot structure. It was only a 50-foot height limit zone, so the state law allowed the developer Workbench to go way above 50 feet, almost 4 times as high.
How did you get involved in the downtown plan expansion?
It goes back to the days when I was part of the Desal Alternatives Group, in response to the city of Santa Cruz wanting to build a desalination plant. And that idea prompted citizens of Santa Cruz to vote to give themselves the right to decide whether there should be a desal plant or not. Instead of city council approving it, it would have to go to the people. That won by 73% of the vote, but the idea of desalination keeps popping up again, and particularly around the idea of growth. So if the city, which currently still has inadequate water supply in a multi-year drought, we know that because we're being asked to cut back on our water use. And so the city has downplayed the issue of growth as if it does not affect the rest of the community, but it certainly does. Right. So that's one of my concerns about this project.
Right. What's wrong with tall buildings?
Nothing per se, but I think that in Santa Cruz, having 25-story, potentially even higher than that, buildings is a bit much for most people. I think most citizens of Santa Cruz and even of the county would agree that that is too big. Big ones that you see going up now are only 6 and 7 stories. So imagine 2 or 3 times that tall being allowed down in the south of Laurel.
Right. Is your concern also, Rick, about the 100-year flood event?
Absolutely. I mean, if growth is going to happen, would you put it in a flood zone? I'm wondering, why aren't people talking about this? In the entire downtown really is in a flood zone. They call it a 100-year flood zone. That was a designation made in 2002 when they raised the levee height. They said it'd be in 100 years where you'd have a weather event that would exceed the capacity of those levees. Well, we know from the state of California analysis about the city of Santa Cruz that if there's a 1-foot rise in sea level, that 100-year flood event happens every 10 years.
Oh. And
the expectation is that by 2060, we're going to have a 1-foot level sea rise. So that's not very far. It was far away from me. I don't think I'll live that long, but that certainly is not the place to draw more and more people to that place. You're subjecting the future residents of that area to floods.
And I wanted to also mention that part of the early versions of the proposal, and I think the current proposal as well, although they make it very unclear in the current documents, but is to include a huge amount of earth and fill, like dirt, a big wedge-shaped piece of dirt to bring the grade up to the top of the levee so that you would come out of these luxury towers on the lobby floor and step right out onto the top of the levee. And because putting that dirt in the floodplain causes, if there is a flood or when there is a flood, it causes that floodwater to move out further out onto the floodplain. So it expands the extent of the flood and also the height of the flood. So that's something that this environmental impact report that they just did needs to address. We wanted to talk about this environmental impact report too. That is just out of the last couple weeks, and we have about a little bit more than 2 weeks left in the comment period. So February 21st is the deadline for comments on the environmental impact report for the downtown plan expansion, and we encourage people to let their concerns be known to the city. This is the way to do that.
Now, the thing I heard is that part of the reason why there is a want for an expansion is the Warriors. Is that correct?
Yes, they currently they play. This is the Santa Cruz Warriors. They're the developmental minor league team for the Golden State Warriors, and they're very popular. I support them. I love them. I want them to stay. But right now they play in this tent type structure that is getting pretty long in the tooth. It's getting old, and in order to keep the Warriors here, the idea is we need to build this new stadium facility, and they're talking about doing it where Ace Hardware is and the next block down. And so that is kind of the sort of the carrot for this project, a carrot on a stick kind of thing.
The city did a study of a new Warriors arena around 2017. They figured that it would never break even financially. The costs of building a structure would not be met by the revenue generated. So the idea on the part of the Warriors would be, if they own property, they would build housing, lots of housing, that would subsidize the arena, on which they wouldn't make any money. So they figured that in order to build that much housing, they needed to change the zoning to allow more housing in this area. That's one of the drivers of this.
And our point is that you can still get a lot of housing. You can get the original intent of the project without changing the zoning. You can keep the current height limits, which are still very generous at 48 feet for along the levee there, and then 35 feet for much of the rest of the area, because the state density bonus allows you to go double or even triple that. So you're still going to get a lot of housing and a lot of taller buildings than most people want, but there's nothing that can be done about that. The city does not need to raise it up to 85 feet, which is what they're proposing. And so we're saying keep the zoning where it is. You're still going to get plenty of housing. You're still going to be able to do the stadium.
It's kind of like one of those things that this plan to allow more density down at the south of Laurel came about before the most recent state legislation that allows doubling the density of a project. So in some sense, the state legislation removed the real reason for this project. But you know how projects are, they have their own momentum, and it takes some kind of courageous leadership to say, you know what we were going to do, we don't need to do anymore. So that's why we come on the radio, because people need to let the city council members know that this is a mistake. 20-story buildings in south of Laurel in a flood zone, casting shadows on any kind of recreational area that they're planning to build there. And who knows what kind of levels of community you can have in a 20-story building. I don't know, Mathilde, maybe you've lived in a 20-story building where there's community. No, I haven't. All right, but I have my doubts.
Basically, you're wondering why they continue with the expansion of the downtown plan.
Well, and also the environmental impact report does not evaluate the new state law. It barely mentions that there is a possibility of a state density bonus. It doesn't specify that this new one allows double the height, double the density. It's AB 1287, is Assembly Bill 1287. It's the 100% stackable, quote unquote, density bonus. And so the environmental impact report needs to evaluate that and the impact it would have if the city decides to raise height limits. And that is something it doesn't do now. We need the city to revise the environmental impact report.
Right.
The environmental impact report says one of the purposes of the project is to raise more revenue for the city government, right? Okay. I'm glad they came out and said it. But imagine all the equipment that our fire department is going to have to purchase. Right now, our tallest building is the Palomar Hotel. I think that's 7 stories. It's going to be a huge expense. I mean, do we come out even after all that revenue going into the city? I'm not sure about that.
And of course, you said the revenue is also going so that we can build another stadium for the Warriors.
The city has said that they're not going to subsidize the Warrior Stadium, and I'm glad about that. And I can kind of help share the credit on that, I think, because a lot of people didn't like that idea. But what they're going to allow the Warriors to do is somehow purchase land, and it will be, I mean, the Warriors will be benefiting from the city's zoning. It's like a gift to landowners to increase the amount of building that they're allowed to do on their property, right?
Now, when the Warriors came to town, there's no judgment from either one of us here about the Warriors. But when they came into town, if I recall correctly, it was also said that the city wasn't going to pay anything, and yet they received at least $1 million. Is that correct?
That's correct. They did loan the Warriors money to build that stadium, which is so ironic because the Warriors team is worth billions of dollars. You know, it's just like, or hundreds of millions anyway. It was like, why do you need this poor little city of Santa Cruz to loan you money? I'm not sure about that.
Listeners, this is KSQD Exploring Monterey Bay. And I am here, Mathilde Rand, host, 89.5, 89.7, and 90.7 FM. And of course, you can also listen to us online at ksqd.org. As I said, my name is Mathilde Rand, and my guests are Rick Longinotti and Frank Barron. Our topic of conversation is the Santa Cruz Downtown Plan expansion. And so far, we gave a little background about what the expansion does or doesn't do, and we started talking about the EIR. But before we go talk a little bit more about what people can do to comment on the draft EIR, can you tell us a little bit more, Rick, about the water situation?
Yeah. The average person that I've talked to in Santa Cruz has just a basic instinct that we save water because we run short, and every few years there's a drought, right? And we've developed this whole ethic of conservation that's made us the most outstanding community in the state, one of the most outstanding in terms of water conservation, okay? But we also know that when you grow and grow the number of water customers, that you're placing more of a strain on that existing system. The environmental impact report denies that. They say, no, this is not going to place a significant impact on the city's water supply. And people understand, well, what? We just keep growing, and then what happens is, and we've seen this before, is the city comes around later and says, oh, guess what? We're going to need a big water project. And you can just see it coming down the road. So I think a lot of people in Santa Cruz are wise to that, and they are going to want to have a say in how much we grow and where, right? I mean, it's possible for the community to say, yeah, we don't mind cutting back so that we can grow a certain amount, but they want to have a say.
All of our water comes from what falls as rain in the county. We don't have any connection to the state water system. We don't get Sierra snowmelt or anything like that. It all is what falls as rain and then goes into the groundwater. It gets pumped out. So we do have a limited supply. Predictions are that droughts will get worse in the future, and they did an analysis of the worst 5-year drought that could be expected, and they used the period 1973 through 77. Well, it turns out the first 2 years of that 5-year period are abnormally wet years. 73, 74, abnormally wet. 75 was a normal rainfall year. It was only 76 and 77, which were extreme drought, that are the only dry years in that whole 5-year period. And yet they used that 5-year period as their example of a multi-year drought. So the EIR needs to be revised in that regard.
Well, you have a certain technical reports that are published when you want to build. Oh, yeah, we got enough water. And then you have other technical reports when you want to build a water supply project. Oh, no, we don't have enough water, you know. So in our comments, we're kind of bringing out the inconsistencies.
They say it's 1,600 new housing units in the south of Laurel, but they're evaluating for potential of being 1,800. With that new density bonus, it could be far more than that, and so we don't even know because they didn't analyze that. it's hard to say that you're going to have 1,800 new housing units and there's not going to be much more of an increase in water demand.
Does the EIR say anything about ASR, aquifer storage and recovery?
Yeah, so I was on a committee called the Water Supply Advisory Committee when the city put the brakes on desalination on account of Measure P that put the voters in charge of desalination. The city went back to the drawing board and assembled this community committee. And one of the best prospects was a thing called aquifer storage and recovery. In other words, storing water down in the aquifer. And that would be accomplished by injecting water from the river and streams into the aquifer, and then you can pull it back out during the dry months of the year. Well, the pilot project is actually happening in the Live Oak area, and it looks very promising for limited scale, but it's not nearly going to solve our problem, just those Live Oak wells. They do plan to study them in the Scotts Valley area, but they haven't even begun a pilot project to study them there. So we know we're at least a decade out from even understanding whether it would work in the Scotts Valley area. Nevertheless, this EIR is counting on that water from Scotts Valley. They're counting on that, saying that is going to help supply this project, which is just not correct.
And of course, you mentioned 1,800 units, but it's not the only project. We have several projects going on right now in the city. I'm not sure how many units that is along Front Street and, of course, by the clock tower. So we're not just
over
talking...
2,000, I think? Did I read that?
I'd have to go back and look, but it's in that neighborhood for sure.
Yeah, so we're not talking 1,800, we're talking at least 2,800, 3,000 and up. The stress on our water system, I hear you, Greg, that is going to be tremendous. And we cannot count on the Scotts Valley aquifer. We can count a little bit, it looks like, on Live Oak. So you think it's not going to be solving our water problem if we grow that much?
We're on track to improve our water situation. Mm-hmm. And actually, the injection wells, aquifer storage and recovery, is a relatively lower environmental impact in terms of just the energy use and so forth. When you get into desalination, it's maybe 10 times the energy intensity to desalinate ocean water as it is to pump water out of the ground. So we're on track to kind of make the most of what we got in terms of the rainfall that we've got stored in the aquifer. But there are limits. We are living in a limited place on a limited planet, and we see that right up close when it comes to water.
Do I understand it correctly then that it isn't that you're totally against growth, but you want it to be balanced based on all the factors that deal with the growth, including the major one being water, but I'm sure there's others as well. Like you mentioned, we need to have more equipment for probably police and fire department. So a balanced growth, is that what you're looking for?
I think it needs to be a community conversation, right? What a lot of people feel, and I maybe count myself one of them, is that the developer interests are getting well taken care of at City Hall. And that's just one part of our community. We don't want to hand the keys of the city to developers. Their interests and our interests overlap kind of like a Venn diagram in some respects, right? Because they do build housing. But we need to make the best deal that we can with the private sector in order to get housing affordability.
And this will be the biggest project in the city's history. Maybe UCSCU would have been right up there too, but this is going to be definitely the biggest in the recent years. So it's something that a lot of people are not even aware of. And so we're trying to get that word out that this is a huge deal, and people, if they are concerned, they should be studying the documents and in the next couple of weeks here submitting their comments.
That's what I was wondering first is what can listeners do? And you're talking first about the draft EIR.
Yeah,
Why don't you say some
the
more
city
about
has the environmental impact report on their website, and there's a number of other documents that are associated with it, appendices and other chapters that they're revising of the downtown plan and that sort of thing. It'll take some time to review the whole thing, but it's worth taking a look at, and there's a way for you to submit your comments on the website, I believe. The deadline, like I said, is Friday the 21st of February, so it's coming up. So let those folks know what you're thinking about. I mean, there's all kinds of other impacts we haven't even gotten to, like traffic. There's going to be huge impacts on traffic traffic and circulation in that whole area. It's already gridlock a lot of times, especially during summer weekends. There's going to be huge impacts on parking. They're not providing enough parking for all of those housing units. So they're assuming that most of these people are going to be riding their electric bikes, taking Ubers, getting deliveries on Amazon. So that stuff hardly is touched on at all in this document. So that we need to let the city know that they need to look at that.
Everyday living is not taken care of.
Right, yeah. Where are people going to park? And people are going to want some cars. It's like one parking space for every 3 units or something in some cases.
Oh.
Yeah.
Okay. So people can comment on the draft ERR. What else can people do?
Let their city council members know how you feel. You can just do that anytime, just contacting either the city council person that represents your district. This is within the city. Or you can just do it to any city council person and the mayor. The mayor is at large, Fred Keeley. And so they would love to hear how people are feeling, I'm sure. I think even if you're outside the city, your voice counts, but not probably as much as if you are within the city.
Any letter writing?
Yeah, letter writing to those folks would be of prime importance.
Yeah, I think it'd be good to connect with people who are listening and they want to do something to connect with us. And I'm going to give my personal information if they want to contact me. They could contact me through my personal website, ricklonginotti.com. And if you can't spell Longinotti, it's Longinotti. I could be reached through that. Because, we need to come together and organize with each other to make the most impact.
Right. And if people want to use this program's email, which is exploring@ksqd.org, I'll be happy to forward this to both of you, what people are saying. So letter writing, anything to the newspapers?
Frank's going to go on a media blitz.
Well, I'm attempting that. This is part of it, actually. I hope to be able to talk to some of the local reporters, and I know I have an appointment to talk with one of them, but hopefully more than that.
Yeah, so as people see those articles, they, definitely write letters to the editor.
Letters to the editor.
Sentinel, Good Times, Lookout.
Correct.
Yeah, good. And so we said that people can have access to the draft ERR, and that's on the City of Santa Cruz website.
Yeah, you have to search for it a little bit, but it has its own page, and then you can click on the various documents.
I looked at it, and it says cityofsantacruz.com, all one word, cityofsantacruz.com/home, and then there's a search field. And then if you search for downtown plan expansion, you'll get there to several things, including the draft ERR. So it's not that hard. I'm glad about that. We've had that in the past a little bit harder. We have 2 minutes for final thoughts.
One of my biggest takeaways would be to tell the city you don't need to upzone. You can get everything that you want in terms of the number of housing units you want. You can get the Warrior Stadium. You don't need to increase the height limits, given that the state allows developers to go double or triple that high. So if you don't want 20 to 30-story buildings in Santa Cruz, keep the height limits where they are now.
Yeah, and I think it begs the question, how do we get affordable housing anyway? Do we make these sweetheart deals with developers where they run away with bags full of money and leave people in a flood zone? Is that where we want to put our affordable housing? We got a lot of thinking to do. Why can't we be more like some cities in Europe and elsewhere where there's real genuine affordability? Well, that's a whole conversation.
So we need community get-togethers, discussions, and communication with our leaders, and see if we can come up with something that is both looking at the reality of what is needed to have growth, and also not stop growth altogether, but being balanced. So anything else?
I'm good. Thank you for inviting us.
There's going to be plenty of growth, even if they scale back this plan. There's growth.
Well, I'd like to see some growth in people's understanding and communication with each other. I think that's the growth I definitely want right now. I want to thank my guests, Frank Barron and Rick Longinotti. This was Exploring Monterey Bay. The contact information again is
ricklonginotti.com.
And also exploring@ksqd.org if you want to make general comments. And of course, the website for the draft ERR is cityofsantacruz.com/home, and then search for downtown plan expansion. Thank you so much for listening.
Thank you.